All right, so now you have at least a decent idea of what JSON is and how the Fetch API works. I'm going to just delete this items.json file because it's not actually part of our project. And now we're going to jump into script.js. Now, we need to fire off some events and we need to select some DOM elements. So we need both of these select lists. We need both of these inputs and the swap button. So let's start to create some variables to grab that stuff. So let's say const, and I'm going to call this variable currency. Let's do currency element underscore one. Okay, it's just what I'm going to use as a naming convention here. And let's use document dot, and since everything is in an ID, we'll use get element by ID. And we're grabbing currency dash one, which is the ID of this right here. Okay, and then at the same time we need two, so let's call this one currency element 2 and currency 2. We also need the amounts, so let's actually copy this down again and we'll call this one amount element 1. Change this to amount 1, which is this right here, and then we want this, which is amount 2, so we'll copy this down, and this is going to be amount element 2 and amount 2. Okay, and then in addition to those, we need the rate, which is, if we look in the HTML, this right here, so it has an ID of rate. There's nothing in this, we can't see it displayed, but it will be right here. We can actually close that up. So const rate element is equal to document dot get element by ID rate, and then let's grab the swap button. So we'll say swap equals document dot get element by ID, and that has an ID of swap. So that's all of our DOM elements that we need. So this calculate function is going to be very important. So this is going to be called basically on everything when we select a new currency, when we change the amount, and so on. So what this is going to do is fetch exchange rates and update the DOM. Okay, and then we're running the function here. So we're running it to begin with, and then we also want to create some event listeners. And like I said in past projects, I like to put my event listeners at the bottom. So let's just say event listeners. So we have our currency element 1, and we're going to add an event listener. And that's a select list, so it has a change of it. And when that's changed, we want to call calculate. And then I'm just going to copy this down. We need 4 of these. So let's see. The next one is going to be amount element 1, which is the input. So there's actually an event called input in JavaScript, and that will run if we type something in here, which would be a number obviously, or if we go ahead and use the arrows. Okay, so either one of those is going to fire off input, and then it's going to call calculate. Then we have currency element 2, which is a select, so when it changes we'll call calculate. And then we have amount 2, so change that to amount element 2, and that will also call change. All right, I'm sorry, yeah, it'll fire off input and it'll call calculate. So in here, let's just do a console log, and we'll just say ran. And if we open up our console here, and so right away it runs because we call this initially. If I change the currency, you can see the 2 here means it ran again. If I click this arrow, it runs. If I change this with text, it runs. If I choose one of these, it runs. If I change this, it runs. So no matter what we do here, it's going to call calculate. Aside from the swap button, that's going to do something different. Okay, so close that up for now. And then inside calculate, we need to get the values of these currency 1, currency 2 elements, because right now it's just choosing the select box. We want the actual value that's inside. So let's create a variable called currency, just currency 1, and set that to currency element 1 dot value. That'll give us the value. And then we also want the value of currency element 2. Okay, and just to test it out, we'll say console log currency 1 and currency 2. So if we go over here, so USD and EUR, if I change, there we go, TWD, EUR, good. So the next thing we want to do is actually make our requests. Now, if we look at the API documentation, it's very, very simple. This is one of the easiest APIs to deal with. We just need to call this endpoint with whatever the currency that we want, which is going to be currency 1, right? If we have USD here, that's what we want to get passed in. If we change it to something else, we want that passed in. So this part of it needs to be dynamic. So let's say fetch. And we're going to use a template literal in here, so we're going to use some backticks. That just means we can actually insert variables right into it rather than using like string concatenation. So let's grab this here, this endpoint, paste it in, and then this needs to be, like I said, dynamic. So to use a variable in a template string, we just simply use this syntax, a money sign and then curly braces. And the variable that I want is currency 1, not currency element 1, currency 1, which is going to be the value of currency 1, this right here. Okay, and then this is going to give us a promise back, so we want to tack on dot then res, and we want JSON format, so res dot JSON, and then we get another promise. Okay, and then in here is where we get our data. So we use an arrow function, and let's just for now console log data and see what we get. So we'll go back and let's open up our console. So we get an object with the base, which is basically the currency we're requesting for, which is USD, because that's what we have selected by default. It gives us the date, it gives us the time last updated, and the rates, which is what the most important part of this is. So it gives us the rates for every other country. Okay, including the country we actually used, which is the United States, or the currency we used. Okay, so we know that we're getting that data back. So let's go back here, and actually I'll just comment that out in case you want to see what that is another time. And I'm going to create a variable called rate, and we want to get data dot rates. Okay, so data dot rates is this right here. And we want to get whatever the currency of currency 2 is, right? So we have that available to us here, so we're going to use that as an index, currency underscore 2. All right, and then what we'll do is let's do another console log here of rate and see what we get. So we get this value, which is the currency rate for euros. If I choose something else, we're going to get that value, and so on. All right, so far so good. We get the rate of the selected currency. So now we want to update. Let's actually do the rate element, which is here. So I'm going to take the rate element, and let's set the inner text, and we're going to set that to a template string or template literal. And let's say 1, because the default is going to be 1, and then whatever currency 1 is. So currency 1 equals, and then the rate, so the variable rate, which we just defined above, and then currency 2. All right. Whoa, wait a minute. Why is it in the button? I think I messed something up here. Yeah, this button should have an ID of swap. There we go. The rate is right here. So this div is what we're filling in. So 1 USD equals that amount of euros. So it gives us the rate, but we want to know what is $1 USD in euros, and that we want to display here. So in the calculate function here, I want to go down to the bottom, and let's take the amount element 2 and the value, and we're going to set that. Okay, so we're going to set that to the amount element 1 value, and we just want to multiply that by the rate, and that'll give us the correct value. Now I want it to be a decimal with 2 decimal points, so we can use the toFixed method and just pass in 2 here, and then we'll save, and there we go. So 1 USD is 0.90, and if I change this, it'll change that value, and if I change this over here, it'll change the rate, and it'll change that value as well. All right, perfect. So the last thing I want to do is to be able to swap these. So if I want, for instance, euro to be up here and USD down here, I want to be able to do that. So we have this swap element, which is our button, and we need to add an event listener for that. So let's say swap dot add event listener, and it's going to be on click. And when that happens, we'll just run a function. I'll use an arrow here. And then we need a temporary variable to store the value of currency 1. So this will be currency element 1 dot value, and then we're going to set currency element 1 dot value to currency element 2 dot value, because we're just swapping them. Okay, and then we'll set currency element 2 dot value to the temp, where we stored the initial value of currency element 1. So we're just simply swapping them, changing places, and then we'll call calculate. Okay, so now if I click swap, there we go. So now up here is euro and down here is USD, and it will change the rate and everything. So it shows us the rate here, and then the value. We can change it, swap it again. So pretty cool, very dynamic. Swap that, change that. Awesome. So that's it. So it was a pretty simple project, but it introduced you to the Fetch API, to JSON, to working with a third-party API, and dealing with DOM elements and so on. All right, so I will see you in the next project.